we can start. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to Futureproofing Now, Season 3, Episode 7. It is personal future readiness. Are you ready for the future? I'm Andrea Cates, and this is Sean Moffitt. And Sean, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, I think this one, we certainly sparked a number of people nodding their heads to the fact that, we often talk about innovation in terms of companies and how we can get our companies on a great track. We talk about it in terms of our teams and how we can lead them to the promised land. But I think part of the underexposed part of innovation is how do we get ready, like we as people, and looking at ourselves before looking at anybody else. Because I think you oftentimes say something along the lines of, who should do this? And it's like, wait a minute, I'm that person, right? And so I think that's something we oftentimes say, so sorry if you're going to use it on this one because I'm stealing your thunder. But so we're talking about how people can get ready for the future, and it's less about the tactics and should you learn AI? Of course you should learn at least to be literate and fluent in AI, but it's more around what are some of the 20 of the attributes that you should really try to embrace and adopt and learn as we get into the future?
I'm excited because the future is something that we care a lot about. And we also, I think, here at Futureproofing Next/Futureproofing Now have a very different and distinct view about the future. It's not a conventional view. So I'm ready to get started, and we can share our non-conventional views.
All right, and here we are, a little bit more well-dressed. This is midsummer, so you're looking pretty good today. I'm kind of looking like my summer self today. So, I think falling under this, guys, is we like to say we have domain of the future, or the future is unwritten. It really is. I mean, I think we can connect a lot of different dots, but if we are willing to be ready for a future, we're also willing to know that there are alternate futures that may exist. And so based on how much input you put in, you'll get a different output potentially based on being really good at it. So I thought I'd just top line that off the top. This is part of our ongoing set of scheduled events. We have 16 of them this year. So we're kind of at the halfway mark. And we'll talk about one of a few of the follow-up ones later on. And we have a book that's coming out. We're having a book that's coming out this month, and hopefully on your lips, you will have see, learn, decide, commit as 4 words that you will repeat over and over and over again after having read our book or being part of any of the stuff that we'll talk about after this webcast as well. Any thoughts on those 2 things, Andrea?
Well, I don't know. I'm really glad to replace Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice as my mantra. So glad to be moving to see, learn, decide, commit. We've joked about, because we've been at this for a few years now, and we've joked about how it's almost worthy of a tattoo, to remind ourselves that when change isn't happening, it's not just that we need new ideas. It's not just that we should be able to, quote, predict a future. It's not just that we should be able to give people books. They should have them shrink wrapped on their shelves, or show them another model, or give them a canvas that they have no idea what to do with. So what we keep saying is, this is actionable and practical. And when it comes right down to it, it took us a long time to figure out that it boils down to this 4 words. What are we seeing, and how can we learn better? How can we decide and do it as a group? And then this notion of commitment is something I'm all about right now. Yeah, so I'm excited about this. So yeah, let's dive in.
Wonderful. I thought I'd start off with a stat just to put us into scope. And I think executives aren't necessarily the key audience for this session. I mean, it's us, whoever you are and whatever stage of your professional life or status or level. But it is interesting that only 18% of executives believe their organizations are change agile. And when Mercer did this study, they tore through it. Is it budget? Is it strategy? Is it leadership? Is it, do we not have the right training programs? And it really comes down to, or at least they found out in their situation, that it came down to behaviors, and it came down to, personal will to actually want change to happen. And I think we've seen this quite a lot, Andrea, where God, that seemed like such a great idea. Why didn't that ever happen? Kind of doing the forensics on something. And a lot of times, it comes down to people. People don't want to make it happen for either good or for bad reasons, or just for some unconscious biases and behaviors that they bring to the table.
I actually think it's worse than that. And I know you agree with me here. It's actually kind of saying one thing and meaning another. And so we say we want agile, and yet sometimes our systems reward people for doing what they've been expected to do from last quarter. We say we want agile, and yet, we have a lot of fear. And, we've been big fans of a book that's all about, this notion of fear. And that drives us, pretty substantially the same way that we've got the motivation in the positive way. And I think the final thing that you and I, agree on is this notion of agile. The risk is just like this picture, there's the risk of doing nothing for sure. But then with all the alternatives, actually, to a certain extent, the more we've learned innovation, the more paralyzed we can become because the options are vast and it's very hard to know where we should place our bets.
Yeah, it's almost like company cultures are almost, we talk about certain people being passive aggressive. I find a lot of corporate cultures are passive aggressive, where they may say something, but then they will work tacitly and implicitly on something else through various subterfuge. So yeah, I think we agree on that. I think one of the big things in this study, interestingly enough, was catching the behaviors of other people. And so as your bosses or your second or third line boss or your C-suite, you're not always going to be there able to intervene on bad behavior. And it's having different teammates and different people addressing behavior as it happens, it turns out is really key. But we're looking at this moving forward. And I think, I love this model of circle of control versus influence and versus concern. You know what? I'm concerned about what the pandemic is going to do with my business, kind of the next decade of, what my business turns out to be. A bit above my pay grade. If I'm Joe Biden, maybe that's his circle of influence or control. I need to react to it, but certainly I'm probably not going to do too much about it in terms of my day-to-day life, trying to impact that. More interesting is circle of influence, where it's like, hey, you know what? I may have a part to play in this. And certainly an interest to everybody should be their circle of control, the things that within themselves they can control about the future. And we think bringing some personal readiness is one of those things that certainly, even in a bad company or a bad situation, you can bring your best self to work. So, Andrea, any thoughts on that?
No, I just think that one of the frustrations is that we would like collectively to feel that we're in control, but, not to be too existential, but we're really not. And so even when we feel like we're in control of something, then the rug comes out, and we were joking a couple of weeks ago about scenario planning, having done, 10 years of it with Royal Dutch Shell and others, and scenario this and scenario that. And yet there's absolutely no guarantee, just because we can name scenarios doesn't mean that we can guarantee which one will occur. And that means, it's pretty insecure to be a leader. You really have to feel comfortable with ambiguity. And I think that's the toughest part of this whole topic.
Yeah, it's very true. And it's very specific to your situation as well. What does your culture demand? What do you demand of yourself? So let's ask the simple question: are you ready for the future? I'm sure we could have people popping out of cakes and having some real energetic song like a sales conference and asking the question, but we've looked at it from a number of different ways. And our answer was this. We have call it a survey, if you will. We call it personal future readiness assessment.
Wait, hang on one second. We have to have a drum roll and a big whistle and an applause, because this is a big deal. Yay!
Oh, all right, good.
Yay.
Sorry, I missed my cue there. Sorry. People popping out of cakes, fireworks going off, squishy devices being thrown out into the crowds right now. We tried to balance out the fact that, well, God, there's 100 different things that you could be better at. But specific to being ready for the future, we kind of looked at 5 different camps of things. And then we boiled that down even further and said, great, what are the 4 things that drive that? We have a statement that people can look at themselves and go, do I agree that's what I'm embodying or not? And then each one of these, you can give yourself a point score out of 5. So we tried to balance comprehensiveness with simplicity to get you to 100 score. And certainly if you get on this list with some measure of objectivity, it's tough to be objective about ourselves. You can actually have other people ask it about you or answer it about you. But if you're sniffing up in the certainly above 60, 70, certainly you get into the 80 camp, we would probably say that you are extraordinarily ready for the future. So this will be in our book. It's certainly in our practice. It's kind of a fun thing to do with groups in terms of at the start of a project, looking at, okay, like there is some fortitude needed before embarking on anything ambitious. Are you ready for it? And having a good look in the mirror. Andrea?
Well, I was just telling people to feel free to take some screenshots in the meantime, because the book's coming out. And in the meantime, these are tools we would love for you to start, putting into the wild, as we say. One of the things that is different about this approach is, sometimes people use diagnostics like this as a limiting mindset. And so, for instance, with Myers-Briggs, I'm an INTJ. And so for a long time, I thought that meant I couldn't do X, I couldn't go to a bar and hang out. I couldn't do a keynote. I couldn't lead a workshop. Totally not true. But it gave me a sense of the delta, the shift, the gap between where I currently was in terms of maybe natural inclinations and where I needed to be in terms of leadership or impact. And so what we love about this is when you look at yourself as an individual and you take stock, sometimes it can be a current mindset. You might have just led a really important initiative within your company. You're all in, you're exhausted from having done it. A lot of things have happened. I'm thinking of our colleagues in the healthcare industry who had just come through some really major changes before COVID. And then COVID happens and it's like, oh, wait a minute, now we have to shift everything. Now we're going to have home healthcare as the focus, maybe, instead of this fantastic in-hospital program that we had been spending a year being invested in. So this isn't a judgment. What we love about this is it's a snapshot. We can say, okay, right now, my motivation might not feel like it's at the highest level in terms of what I need to do to change. Or it might be that my team is exhausted or that I'm being rewarded on, quarterly earnings. And really the rewards aren't going to be there for me within my current context to really make change happen. Or it might be that knowledge. I mean, a lot of this notion of what Sean and I have figured out is a limitation is I say I want to, whatever, machine learning is a big one that we hear. I say I would like to apply machine learning, but when it comes right down to it, it's going to take, I don't know, a month for me to take some time off and take Andrew Ng's Udacity course and really learn what is this thing called machine learning. And so I might have a resistance factor just to the first step of knowledge, just to the first step of motivation, change, risk, Esprit. And so we don't view this as always limitation, kind of an assessment, but it's a pulse check. It's a way to say, where am I now? And then to zoom back and say, where would I ideally need to be to support something like change?
Yeah, I think that's right, Andrea. I think personal future readiness is almost like personal fitness training, right? Like it's that first step in commitment to actually do something oftentimes is the torturous long one that takes so long to get done. And once you get there, you realize, this isn't that bad after all. So let's get into at least the broad categories here. So we, like I said, we could have many, many debates in terms of different things that didn't make our cut or don't feel like they've been fully included. But we tried to make this a tool that at all levels in an organization, you could look at and go, look, am I grabbing my paddle and doing enough in terms of getting my company, my team, the people around me into the future? So we looked at it from 5 different standpoints. What's the knowledge that I'm bringing to the table? We are a knowledge economy. We should continue to, I think what we say is perpetual refresh, learn, unlearn, relearn. Am I doing enough of that? Also motivation, am I bringing the most, energetic version of myself that wants to get ahead of the future? Am I doing enough to increase the capacity of not only myself, but of others? We see it oftentimes in sports where it's like, great, Russell Westbrook, you're great at bringing energy to the table, but why do the 6 other people in your team hate you and are just sitting on the sidelines waiting for the ball to be passed to them? Interesting. I'm sorry for all you Russell Westbrook fans. I know he just got traded to LA. Risk reward. This is the biggest difference between startups and corporates. And oftentimes corporates go, why can't we do what that group of people are doing over there? And if you peel the onion back, oftentimes it is, well, you know what? They were willing to risk it and you weren't. So are you bringing enough? And admittedly, this is corporate life, measured risk and reward kind of approaches. And then finally, we just have this camp, but it's tough to define, but just, what is the change esprit that you're bringing? I know esprit is a French word, but like, what is your joie de vivre, your kind of internal compass that you're showing to other people that hopefully becomes infecting and contagious? So Andrea, the 5 broad categories, any thoughts?
No, I think what I think is different. The reason that we thought about this so hard is that a lot of people think it's just knowledge. If you just know something, then you will be open-minded. Some people think that it's just attitude. And so by combining all of these is actually the truth. What we care most about is not a belief, but it's the action. And the people who take action have to have all of these. I think everybody realizes that. It took us a while because it seemed to the rational among us that knowledge should immediately translate into action, but it doesn't.
And to support your point, I mean, maybe just we'll ask people listening to this live and on online, think about a group or a team that you're on, or just your company in total. Think about the smartest person in the room. The smartest person in the room oftentimes is not the person that gets the stuff done or the successful stuff done. I'm not dispensing the fact that they could be a wonderkind at everything, but to your point about knowledge, I just think about people in my life that just get things done. And it's not just that they're accomplished and savvy and they have a professional pedigree that makes you want to believe them, but it's just the amount of, I'm thinking of a woman we both know, Andrea, in real estate, where it's just like energy, infection, says things in a way that are so enthusiastic. When somebody doesn't volunteer for something, puts her hand up. And so, yeah, I just think about that a lot. Maybe that's true for other people as well. So let's tackle knowledge here. We'll tackle the 5 different components and the 4 kind of things to build up. So, you can score at home, if you will. Each one of these is 5 points. You can consider yourself excellent at 5 or 1 kind of needing, some development on each one of these. So in 4 ingredients of knowledge, this is the #1 future-proofing skill. So we looked at about 65 different skills, at least for 2021, adaptive intelligence. And we've got the subnomen there. I change in response to my environment and turn it into action. #1 skill of anybody, at least for this decade. And so we thought it should probably make it on the list in terms of just how do you adapt to things. Learning and self-improvement, just an ongoing notion that you can do it. And not only that you believe you can do it, you actually go and seek out opportunity to do it. Curiosity and awareness. I remember back in my word of mouth days when we were looking for influencers, one of the catch-tail signs of an influencer was, do you always drive home the same way, or do you seek out opportunity to look for other things in different ways driving home? And I think that just speaks to an innate sense of curiosity. And then finally, openness. I am broad-minded and mentally flexible. I've seen very smart people in my life that are being washed over by new shifts. We've just seen in a pandemic right now. And if you're not broad-minded and mentally flexible, a lot of smarts and a lot of seasoned good experience turns bad because you can't react to your environment. Andrea, those are the 20 points of knowledge. What do you think?
I'm all in. Let's keep going. I like that.
Motivation. So, it's a challenge sometimes getting up out of bed, particularly in a world where you're probably just going over to your computer yet again, 18 months into this pandemic. So are you purpose-driven? Do you have an unwavering focus driven by values despite obstacles? Can you self-motivate yourself in a world where structures are getting more and more flat, in a world where you don't go into the office anymore? you really have to, there's a real premium nowadays in terms of being self-motivated. Resilience, I'm confident and persevere in the face of resistance and frustration. I think this is crucial from an innovation and a future-proofing standpoint. And resourcefulness. I find some of the more intriguing innovation successes I've ever been part of has always been based on some notion of somebody going outside of the four square lines on the boxes and saying, yeah, you know what? I think we can do it, but we'd have to do it in a different way. And so them being inventive and creative and reactive in the face of a challenge. Andrea, 20 points of motivation.
Well, I think one of the things that's a myth about this that's really unfair is that it all has to be self-motivation. We're big fans of BJ Fogg and his tiny habits approach. And, you know, we've worked with a lot of people at Stanford who come from that mindset. And it turns out that it's not like an innate kind of, you know, self-help book kind of mindset that alone will do it. So it's surrounding ourselves with tiny little things that reinforce this motivation. And, you know, it's always kind of a push and a pull because the resistance is there always. And so how do you overcome that? And that's where I think that these other pieces are really important, because in business, as teams, as leaders, we are in a position to help each other as a team move beyond some of the limitations. So I think that as a leader, if we're on a team, how do we help others around us find their own sense of motivation towards something? And that's why in the old days, we used to have mission, vision, values, and North Star. Today, companies have purpose, and some of the people on today's live audience and participants have been part of the process to get organizations to articulate their purpose. And finally, talent these days, especially Gen Z, they won't stand for a work environment that hasn't clearly articulated a sense of purpose. And so these are things that used to be a nice to have, and now they're a must have in terms of organizations, in terms of leaders, and in terms of teams.
I couldn't agree more, Andrea. And I wanted to give at least some real estate and time to things on the left-hand side of the screen, purpose-driven and resilience. We hosted a couple of different workshops on resilience recently, and I think one of the takeaways I grabbed from an innovation perspective is it's great that you're tying yourself to the purpose of your company. That should be table stakes, but it's also having a real good self-awareness of yourself in terms of what drives your own values, your own ambition. One of our colleagues, Samantha Yarwood, who does a lot of different projects and has been a guest on this webcast before, she wrote a thesis on, pretty much, the best innovators are some of the most self-aware people that know where their compass is going. So I certainly want to give that some press. I personally probably don't spend enough time actually thinking about that type of internal work. And I think that's important for innovators. So we're into the middle 20 points of personal future readiness. And that's great that you're doing it for yourself, but this gets now into how does what you do affect other people? And can you actually, have a rising tide that lifts all ships? And so I don't care if you're an entry-level employee or somebody that's a CEO, people empowerment, you can empower others, by either delegating responsibility, motivating others, providing psychological safety, or providing support for all three. Agility, just being productive and feeling like things aren't moving quick enough. Sometimes that becomes a bit of a bad thing for somebody that might be 30 years in the same company going, why is this person bugging me again about this? But, a lot of times those same people come back going, God, we would have never have done that if we didn't, create some type of agility and urgency focus. So urgency, I change things when the price of failing is higher than the price of change. And then productivity, I like to be busy and take on difficult or audacious challenges. So we all know that, there isn't a lot of headcount nowadays that is just waiting to be put into the game, coach. We're all busy people and working on the smartest things, allowing others to shine and be productive themselves, and making sure that, we're time managing ourselves and creating enough energy and urgency around things that we just don't pass over deadlines and feel like they're fine. Andrea, any thoughts on these ones?
My big point here is about momentum. And it's almost like the laws of physics, inertia. Things at rest tend to remain at rest. and till met by an equal opposite force, et cetera. But sometimes the eddy of moving somewhere is the beginning of moving to the right place. Whereas inertia, like just being inert, just staying still and being paralyzed, that's the worst. And so what we always say is that, and the reason, like in lean startup, there's this notion of being agile or being able to do learning, you sort of fail fast, which we don't believe in. We actually say learn fast. But if you learn something by doing something, that's different from intellectualizing something and wondering if you should do anything. So what is really here, to me, really important is this sense of momentum that helps change happen, because it's easier to redirect a moving force. If I think of any change initiative happening now, doing something and recalibrating is much more powerful than sitting there and the analysis paralysis too long.
I know you hate my sports metaphors, but just in support of what you've just said, Andrea, it's like oftentimes you have players, particularly in basketball, I find, where it's just they may not be the most talented or skilled individuals. Getting the basketball in the net probably is not their best skill in life. However, they have such an engine, they have such a, to your point, a moving object that, they'll probably get a whole bunch of fouls and free throws based on the fact that they're just moving, right? I like that point a lot in terms of just keeping momentum going. I would say from an innovation standpoint too, we did a separate study and we said, how fast are things nowadays? And versus about a decade ago, the claim was that innovation departments are moving 2.6 times faster than they used to. And so it's not only a need and a great trait, but I think it's almost an obligation of innovation and change departments that you need to move quickly because somebody else is probably doing the same. Risk versus reward. And this is probably at some point in time where we both decided to become entrepreneurs, Andrea, versus maybe stay in corporatedom. But one of the defining characteristics of that strategy, it doesn't have to be necessarily, but it tends to be, is just a different approach to risk versus reward. And so 4 elements here. You have an approach to life that is experimentation focused. You love to try out new ideas and methods. You do them through trial and error. Hopefully you learn a lot from them. And then particularly in a corporate setting, which might be a little bit different than startups, where it's like startups, they just keep going at it and keep going at it, fail. They wear it like a badge of failure. I think in corporate life, people do want to say, look, you've tried that 3 times. It hasn't worked. Can we move on to something else now? Or at least take what you've learned and then move on. Risk appetite, I believe there's a greater risk and caution and low ambition than not moving ahead. I don't mind standing out, don't mind appearing different and seeking opportunities, and take pride in showing those differences, not only in kind of the need to maybe make a statement and may have a difference, but also challenge things that might not make sense to the outside world, but do inside your company. And then finally, achievement. You've got a higher performance bar and you like to exceed it. So those were our 4 risk reward elements. Andrea, any thoughts from the trenches from yourself?
The most important thing about this is that, to me, an individual, a team, and a company have to act almost like a team has to act almost like an organism in itself. And so the role of a leader, and people haven't said this very well, but the role of a leader is to pull out the natural tendencies of everyone on the team. So someone might have a huge appetite for standing out, but not everybody. By the way, change doesn't have to happen by standing out. Change can happen by someone having a great idea for where to go and not standing out. And so it's up to us to do a calibration and a leverage of the different strengths that bring us here, right? So you don't have to be, you can be very risk averse and still be open to change, believe it or not, right? You can understand, like I always love to talk about actuaries in an insurance company. They are so aware of the risks. And yet that's what allows them to embrace a good innovation when they see it, because even in the face of the risk, they see that the reward is going to outpace that. And so I think that the biggest disservice that we do is to think that only one kind of person can be an entrepreneur. They have to be really risky. I mean, they're finding out now that, older people, people who've had corporate experience can be fantastic entrepreneurs, specifically because they have domain expertise, track records, and a solid sense truly of where an idea might lead. And so it's a myth to think, oh, only 18-year-olds who code in their bedrooms can be entrepreneurs. And I say this as a person who lives in Silicon Valley with a big bro culture. And I just think that the stats don't support it. And
No,
also, Sean, I'm happy to do the next one if you want me to be the one reviewing it. Feel free to move forward, and I can.
Yeah, I think we got one
that.
last one. When you have a crack at it, I was just
Yeah.
going to say, I was just going to agree with your overall point, though. Like the whole archetype of, we need this type of person, either as a corporate innovator or entrepreneur, is so wrong. I think what we've tried to do, I think, in these different attributes is go, look, even if you're that auditor type, and everybody in the room is going, we should go with this venture, and you're thinking about the risks and feeling that they're non-negotiable, it's your prerogative to actually stand out, and actually state those things as well. So I think, I wouldn't want to dismiss somebody that maybe didn't fall into some cookie cutter archetype. All right, last one we've got here, Andrea, is change esprit. I know you know how to speak French, so we'll get the pronunciation right. Go for it.
Oui. So one of the things, and I'll start with the connector one, the idea of connector, and for people who are listening to this, I'll read that it says, I make connections easily and seek out meeting new, different people. So that's part of change esprit. Energy, I believe change is good and support others who try to make it. Optimism, I have a positive outlook on the future. Communication, I am an energetic, clear, and prolific communicator that inspires actions. And one of the things I love is that sometimes we have a stereotype of what this needs to look like. And my favorite example of extremely successful entrepreneurial company that became a startup, that became a unicorn, I heard the two founders speaking once as they were about to, receive some sort of great award. And there were two guys, and they said, what's the secret to your success and how you're able to bring change about and really disrupt your industry? And one guy was all full of what we would expect, the positivism and the energy and the optimism and all of that. The other guy was a quiet connector. It turned out he was a golfer, and that was kind of his quiet way of making his connections. But what one of them said is, well, what's the secret for change esprit? And one said, I'm the giddy up. And the other one said, and I'm the whoa. And so it was the combination of, sort of two different styles of change esprit, being able to know that there's a steady way to build connections that are trusting. We like to say bedfellows, people really trust you. They'll invest in you. They'll work for you. That's a very different stereotype than what we usually we call, like at a hackathon or jazz hands or these sprints where everybody has to be full of coffee and caffeine. So Sean, what are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, I guess if I was to think, who isn't this? This is like, I will define like a character of types. This is Eeyore, right? I don't know if everybody remembers the donkey from Winnie the Pooh, but it's like, pretty much a loner, kind of, everything, the glass is half empty and everything. And I think those, like, I will state to almost a person that I know in life, those people sub-optimize where they want to get to, both in their own lives and potentially professionally as well. Like there is this sense of, I am excited. And unfortunately, some of it is, I've done some research on this. Some of this is a little bit genetic in terms of, what your approach and thoughts on life are. But generally part of the research also says that we are sometimes more positive about the past than we are about the future. There's a certain group of people that look at, it's going to be dystopic and it's not going to be as good as before. And oh my Lord. And I think you have to resist that. And you have to resist it not only for yourself, but also for the people around you that are affected by it. Trust me, I've worked in companies like this. This is not a good thing. And unfortunately, it's Newton's law of Eeyore, I guess, where, those who are negative, non-communicative, whatever that word is, lazy and siloed tend to attract others to them, and actually they feed off each other. So we want to have great change esprit in companies. So those are the 20 different attributes. I'll dial back up to the tool where we've tried to package them. And I'm sure if you hit us up online, we can probably send you this out. We'll probably have the book in order, and it's probably on page, I'm guessing it's on page 43, but I'm only guessing at that one. It's at least in the first couple chapters of the book. Andrea, anything as we look at this in total, and we always say, this is I think one of our favorite lines, right? I'll give it to you because I think you came up with it.
Catch up, don't give up. And I actually have to attribute it to a project we work on. Some of you who are on this podcast, this webcast, were in this project. You give people all of this motivation, like, here's what's coming, and we're going into singularity, and we've got all this fantastic technology and all of these great business possibilities ahead, and all of these wonderful business models we could create and paths to market. And, you just pile it on, and you get this look of like deer in the headlights, like we can't possibly do anything now that we see how many options there are. And also, we always feel like we're behind. I mean, anytime I was listening to a talk yesterday on synthetic biology, and I thought, oh my gosh, I have to go back to like 11th grade to catch up on this. It's just going to take too long. We were also talking about Pioneer laser discs and how we all had to learn C++, which is the last time I had to learn a language, programming language. And I thought, oh God, like, I don't know Python, I don't know Ruby, like, I don't know Angular. I need to catch up. But then it's like very tempting to do that ostrich head in the sand. I'm just going to give up. And so we are here to help each other take the baby steps to catch up, don't give up. And the second one is your favorite quote.
Oh, the future started yesterday and we're already late. And I stole it from John Legend, unless there was another quote you had in mind. So was it? No, this was the one.
Somewhat, the future started yesterday. We're already late. And also we have a request to go back to the change capacity slide. If we wouldn't mind backing up for a second.
The change capacity.
Change capacity. Here we go. Okay, I'll read it because some people are listening to this as well. So change capacity, the 4 ingredients: people empowerment. I grow the organization by delegating responsibility, motivating others, and providing psychological safety. And for people who don't know that term, we love Amy Edmondson, who has a whole book on the fearless organization that talks about psychological safety. Agility. I hate when things are slow. I'm productive on moving on things. Urgency. I change things when the price of failing is higher than the price of change. And productivity. I like to be busy and take on difficult or audacious challenges. So I'm hoping, give us a thumbs up if that helped. Okay, we got a thumbs up.
Awesome. Oh, I love
okay,
it.
so Sean, you can bring it home.
So yeah. What was your 100 score, Andrea?
My 100 score. Oh, I'm actually in a little bit of a lack of change mode right now. I'm in steady course. It's not that, and it's interesting because I am an optimist and a forward thinker by nature. But as you know, this whole make the book happen, you get into operational mode. And the thought of change for me right now is like, oh my goodness, I've got a lot on my plate. We have a deadline ahead of us. It's very difficult for me to think beyond nose to the grindstone. And so I have a lot of empathy for people who are in that mode themselves. They might be in the middle of something really important. There might be family issues or personal issues. So the thought of rocking a boat for me right now, I don't want anything else on my plate. And I really don't want someone to, like the old book, Who Moved My Cheese? I really don't want anybody to give me more things to do or things to distract me. So I'm actually not very high on the list. What about you, Sean?
I think that's an interesting thing you bring up, because I think, based on some of your innate qualities, I would say regardless of what your current situation is, I think you'd probably perform well on this list. But there are a couple of caveats, right? Like certain departments, certain types of roles, you probably don't want to see somebody with a high future readiness score. I hate to say it that way, but I mean, if you are somebody that is supposed to be myopically fixated on the present, maybe it's present customer service or something. Yeah, you do want to know that you've got some context and perspective to what you're doing. So I think when those two things get too far out of line in a company, where it's like this group of people and this group of people are so far apart, that's when there's issues that start. I would also say one other caveat is, for the people that are very high performers on this future readiness list, don't throw it in other people's face. change is almost like a nail that's standing up sometimes, and it's so quick to want to have a hammer nail it down. And so if you're flamboyantly wafting it in other people's faces, and I've seen it time and time again with different agencies and external partners that come in and say, we are great, we know the future and you don't, that does not engender a lot of loyalty or trust or commitment. So certainly a watch out on that one. On this one, I think.
Oh, I was going to say
sorry.
one more thing to build on that. We have a friend, Matteo Rissi, and he wrote a book called Talents and Rebels. And he's really, he's responsible for some of the largest fintechs in Europe, including like Revolut, and had, ran a big lab and big leader in global fintech. And you would think that he would be all about, like pirates, like Tendai Vicky has a book called Pirates in the Navy. Just rebellious personalities that are always going to rock boats. And what it turns out is, just like Tendai says in his book, Pirates in the Navy, you have to have the sponsorship of the Queen to really get the ship to go out. So, you can't just be a pirate. You have to actually work within an organization and get sponsored. And I think to Matteo's point about Talents and Rebels, if you're making change happen, but as you said, Sean, there's a wake of resentment or fear or people feeling threatened in your wake, it's probably not change that's going to last. It might be flash in the pan change, but there's a lot to be said for the giddy up and the whoa, and even for the Eeyores to be moved to support something, even if they couldn't initiate it.
Yeah, so true. I'm thinking about people I've managed in my life, Andrea, that have fallen into this camp of pirates or whatever classification. And I'm like, certainly I had to create enough berth and room to actually make them do what they were talented and passionate about. But at the same time, and some of them did and some of them didn't, they had a huge obligation to actually, look, if I'm giving you this space to be passionate and great at what you think you should be doing, when you're in settings that I'm not around, you better toe a bit of like the company line and be credible to these other people, because we're going to burn bridges quickly. So just certainly in a corporate setting, maybe less of a startup focused need or ambition, although candidly, we all serve some higher God at some point in time, and just knowing when to modulate what your characteristics are is probably important. And we are around the horn. Oftentimes we have 4 or 5 panelists on this webcast. This time today, it's our little intimate setting, Andrea. We've covered the topic. We're going to do some housekeeping on the end here, but is there stuff that needs to shape and round out what we've just talked about?
Yeah, well, I always learn something and I always have a summary. So I'll start with the summary. I mean, it struck me today that this is really a combination of, well, first of all, it's new thinking. It's not how I was taught this topic at all. I was taught that there's a certain type of person who is ready for change and they're the mavericks, and they're going to be these rebels and talents. They're going to be the rebels, and don't get them involved with the talents because it'll constantly rock the boat. But actually, that's not true at all, especially as Sean and I look at change at scale, because change at scale requires a lot of allies. It requires a lot of people playing different roles, not just the person that came up with some cool idea. So I believe that what I come away with is 5 things. One is resilience. So when our realities change, and we've just all experienced this with COVID, how resilient are we? The second thing for me is agency, and we always talk about that. Can we forge a new corporate direction because we know we must? And I've watched so many leaders in mobile, in healthcare, in manufacturing, in retail. This has just been a year where agency over a future that we can't control at all is something that comes out of the woodwork. The third out of 5 for me is responsiveness. I was tracking personally how many months it took for leaders to come out with statements around, we will now have a changed workplace. It was everything from a day to 5 months. People kind of in denial that the workplace was changing and that we needed to have virtual whatever. Schools have been the worst in some ways. They kept thinking it would go away. So responsiveness is really important. Some schools got it right, and applauding them because it really made our children's lives better. Open-mindedness to diverse points of view. And so the same way that we're trying not to shame anybody who's an introvert or an Eeyore, we're not saying there's anything wrong with them. How do we listen with new sensitivity to those diverse views? And how do we avoid unconscious bias. And then my final of the fifth is adaptive intelligence. And that's something I learned from Sean today from listening. I always talk about the best next, like not the next best, but the best next. So, adaptive intelligence, as Sean was describing earlier, really equips us to get there. If we're trying to figure out which of the following next should be the one to pick, that's where I think that this notion of adaptive intelligence, which comes out consistently in our research, Sean reinforces it all the time, is this notion of how important this is. I didn't know what it was until one of our webcasts a few months ago. So to me, resilience, agency, responsiveness, open-mindedness, and adaptive intelligence are my takeaways. And what about you, Sean?
Yeah, I'm usually a particularly positive person on things and see the future through rose-colored glasses. I think on this one, I want to scare people a little bit. And it's probably because I just posted something on my LinkedIn yesterday that talked about what are the generation defining problems and risks that have come out of this whole pandemic. And so if you look at the future and you just look at some of the basic things that were very high up on the list: crushing government debt, middle class being squeezed, whole bunch of things around polarization and the need to learn and develop skills quickly because the job market is a little bit crazy. You quickly understand that, wow, you know what? If I don't get in charge in front of this future, I'm going to lose my future. I'll put it in those stark terms. And so I've personally taken out on a mission, certainly from the knowledge standpoint, and a little bit of some of the other ones on the list here. Every 3 to 5 years, I look at my learning objectives and knowledge and go, look, I know this is a big part of the future. I know this is not a big part of my repertoire. I need to get in front of this. And so if I look at the list, I think I'm probably well performing on the list only because it's autobiographical. It's a little bit meta. We came up with the survey and we spend a lot of time in the area. So maybe not surprisingly, those are the indicators. So a little bit of scare and fear, as we've talked about earlier, probably doesn't hurt anybody, because I do see an economy that's coming at us that will have complete industries washing over people and broadening skill sets, having some energetic focus about the future and bringing others along for the ride. It will be really, really important.